This video guide is going to discuss how to counter the Starcraft 2 Marauder with units from all three races. We're going to start with Protoss Terran and then finally do Zerg. So the Marauder, we're going to assume that it has concussive shells and Stimpack for this discussion. One good unit is going to be the Zealot. Now early in the game, the Marauder will actually counter the Zealot, especially when it has concussive shells, as it can easily kite the Zealot around, and there's not much the Zealot can do about it. Okay, but once the Zealot gets charged, and once the numbers increase, it becomes a different story, and I'll show you that here. You can still do some kiting with the Marauders, but they just do so little damage that unless you have the perfect micro, you're still going to take a good amount of damage. And even though with this kind of micro, it's looking like it's actually still favoring the Marauders, which it is. The problem is that you'll have other units to hit the Marauders. So if you're having a couple Colossi out, they'll be doing damage to the Marauders while your Zealots are tanking. So speaking of that, I did want to mention the Colossus next. It's very commonly used against Protoss. You need extended thermal lances. And imagine if we had a couple of these versus a bunch equal supply Marauders. So you can't use just pure Colossi to kill Marauders. What you're going to find is the Colossi can even go, the Marauders can even go under the Colossus, and it's not a very close match after that. So let me do that one again real quick. And just to show you that it's, they still do pretty good, but it's not great. Now, if we add on more Marauders, would also give the Protoss players some Zealots. Evens the cost out a bit. And the Zealots will tank for the Colossi, while the Colossi do most of the damage. So, much better fight that way. So the Colossus is a good unit to use. For just straight up fights, the Immortal is good. And it three-shots the Marauder. And once Ghosts come out, the Marauder does a little bit better, but it's still not, very strong. Imagine if it was, the fight looked like this. You can hit EMP on these. Now, if I control these Immortals better and focus fire down the Marauders instead of the Ghosts first, the Immortal would counter. But it's just showing you that the Immortal is weak once Ghosts come out, but before Ghosts come out, it's strong. Another unit that's weak before Ghosts come out is, or weak after Ghosts come out, but good before that, is going to be the Archon. And Archons they are considered massive, so they don't get snared, as you see right there, by concussive shells. You can kite them a little bit, but not perfectly, and you will take some hits no matter what, because the Archons do have range, and they are pretty fast unit. They do bonus damage to bio, and they're not considered armored, so they don't take bonus damage from Marauders. So all air units technically can counter the Marauder, but you don't really see them used often. Massive air units obviously are going to be good, but out of the more common air units, you'll probably see the Void Ray. It's probably going to be your most viable counter. If just a full mass of Marauders and Medivacs come across the map, adding one Void Rays is an easy fix. And that's about it for Protoss. So Zealots with charge, Immortals, Archons, and Colossi are your best bet. Basically, which one to pick depends on what units the Terran's using. If they have Ghosts, Colossi are the best. If they have a lot of Vikings but no Ghosts, Immortals and Archons work well. And Zealots, of course, work well with both. So against other Terran players, Marines are actually the counter, and you're never going to see the Marines used alone. What you're instead going to see is with a medevac support, or something like that. Let's make these armies even. And of course with, you're going to have the key upgrades. So Marines are light units, so they don't take bonus damage from Marauders. So, you know, pretty easy fight there for Marines to use. Or it's pretty strong for Marines are pretty strong against siege tank Marauders. So another good counter is going to be the siege tank. And the siege tank by itself, I mean, it's only really okay versus the Marauder. And I'll show you what I mean. If it's just alone, you can just run in and avoid a lot of the damage. And I mean, the siege tanks still do well, but what if I drop these Marauders with the medevac on top? It wouldn't go so well. So what you want to do is, you know, it's ideal to have some Hellbats that can soak up damage. And they can still try to run in and avoid them, but much less damage taken by the tanks that way. And you just sacrifice some cheap Hellbats. Works pretty well. The Hellbat itself works well against the Marauder, but you generally want to pair it with siege tanks because otherwise it gets kited. But it can take a lot of hits, but you know the Marauder's not going to be able to run around like this if there's a siege tank blasting on it. So I'll just show you them in a straight up battle if the Marauder doesn't micro at all. You can see that the Hellbat barely takes damage from the medevac or the Marauder, and it's quickly catching up in damage. And you know, it might look like an even fight, but Marauders are much more expensive. Hellbats don't cost gas. And as the numbers increase, it favors the Hellbat more and more, since Hellbats do splash damage. So, might not look, like I said, super convincing, but again, siege tanks will be in the back. The fact that they can just take so many Marauder hits without costing a lot of resources is their real strength. So that's really it for Terran counters. I mean, naturally, battlecruisers and banshees are going to be able to attack Marauders. You probably wouldn't go out of your way to use them against Marauders, though. One thing I do want to discuss is the Thor. The reason Thors don't work against Marauders is they're just too expensive. Even though the Thor does okay against the Marauder, it's, you know, a close fight, and the Thor costs an extra 125 gas. So it's not your first choice to use against the Marauder. If you have siege tanks in the back, obviously it makes it a little bit more cost effective. But really, why would you want to risk expensive Thors when you can have Hellbats in the front soaking up damage? That's the key of the Hellbat against bio units, is just to act as a damage sponge. It doesn't really need to do anything else. Alright, so that's about it for Terran. We're going to now go on to the Zerg. So one good unit is going to be the Zergling. On a cost-effective basis, the Zergling does need metabolic boost. And you can see that Zerglings are pretty good against the Marauder. Naturally, Zerglings do get destroyed by Marines once there's medevac support, so you do need like Banelings or Roach or some other unit that's going to be able to take down the Marines for you. And the Zerglings might feel weak on occasion against the Marauder, but it's only when your upgrades fall behind. That's the key. If you don't let your upgrades fall behind, it's not a big deal. So what I'll show you is, imagine the Marauder's got medevac support and an armor upgrade. it's going to be able to really tank the Zerglings pretty easily. I mean, they're still going to counter it, but now imagine if we let the Marauder get an even more of an armor advantage. Now the Zerglings really struggle to pierce the armor, or pierce the medevac's healing capacity. And if you had, and that's letting the Zerglings get this perfect surround on the medevac. You know, that's not really going to happen in most, or on the Marauder. Most of the time the Zerglings aren't going to be able to get the surround. Only 2 or 3 will be in range. And as you can see, I'm starting to lag a little bit. This unit testing map is very laggy. So I want to try to wrap up this video pretty quick. So Zerglings work as long as there's no major armor advantage for the Terran. Hydralisks work well too. They're light, so they don't take bonus damage from the Marauder. So that is kind of a trade, but I feel like it's worth it, especially if you have an armor advantage. I would consider the Hydralisk a good unit to use. Especially, you know, when you consider you might have Zerglings or Roaches soaking up damage for the Hydralisk. Roaches don't really tank Marauders better than Hydralisks do, but Zerglings certainly do. Mutalisks are an okay option, and the reason I include those is because they're fast enough to chase down Marauders. And you'll never really see them engage directly in battle, where you'll just find a bunch of Marauders that can just be chased down by Mutalisks. But what you'll find is that when a Terran is reinforcing their army, when they're attacking you, they'll just stream their units across the map. And Mutalisks can swoop in and pick off Marauders, the Lone Marine, or 2, and medevacs as they stream across the map. Or Mutalisks can also shut down Marauder drops. So that's how you use the Mutalisks. You'll never engage bio directly because Marines are so strong against Mutalisks. Other options for you are going to be the Infestor. And the Infestor works just by locking down units in position. So you can have a bunch of Zerglings or something like that. And you can prevent the Marauders from fighting by locking them constantly in place in Fungal Grove. And I'll show you the Infestor a little bit more in action. What it's really good at is when bio forces get into be a really large number, you can use just a couple Infestors and pair those with Ultralisks. Normally Marauders can kite Ultralisks, but with Fungal Growth, they're stuck in place. And when they're stuck in place, they don't do well against the Ultralisk. They have to be able to kite to engage with the Ultralisk. So the last thing is, of course, the Broodlord. It shouldn't be a surprise that Broodlords are good versus ground units. You know, the Terran has to get out Vikings or battlecruisers to deal with these units. They're just too annoying otherwise, and they get trapped on the Broodlings. So Broodlords, Zerglings, Infestors, Hydralisks, all good options. And that's about it for the counter video. You should have a pretty good idea of how to counter Marauders now. You know, again, just a quick rehash. Lots of Zealots with charge, Immortals, Archons, Colossi with some sort of ground support are good for the Protoss. Marines with upgrades, Siege Tanks, and Hellbats are all good options for Terran. Thors work, but they're very expensive, so you really want to consider using Hellbats as a meat shield no matter what you use. And for Zerglings with equal upgrades, Hydralisks, Infestors, Mutalisks, and Broodlords are all good options. Ultralisks will lose to Marauders unless backed up by Infestors. So, that's it for the video. Hope it was helpful for you, and hopefully you can counter some Marauders in game.